Hey everybody, this is Sarah Russell with Ebb and Flow 200-hour yoga teacher training. This is part of our online module for Asanas, so it's module number 4. And we're gonna get started. We're gonna go through each asana in each category today. And if you wanna join me on your mat, that would be fantastic. So let's go ahead and get started. Today we're gonna just focus on the foundational and structural poses, things that you might want available. Obviously your yoga mat, some water, and then a strap. And I, of course, left my straps at the other studio today. So I've got a little handy dandy TRX strap, but you can use a belt too. A bolster, which is helpful in case you want to help prop yourself up for your students. And then blankets are great. And then I've also got some blocks. Having 2 blocks nearby is always a benefit. So if you want to put that on your to-do list of things that you might want to get for your home practice, that's a good thing to have. So as far as our foundational structure poses, those are the poses that we learned about at the very beginning of teacher training when we talked about the different methods of getting into postures and those foundational perspectives. So the way that these are broken up today is from the foundational perspectives, we're going to move through those asanas that we already probably know and really dive into the alignment of them. So just to touch base on what we're looking for in that anatomical alignment that we already discussed in the previous module is we're looking for feet hip distance or closer. So when we're closer together, the big toes touch, and we're not actually pigeon-toed or anything. Big toes are together to touch. Toes are spread nice and wide, so we're kind of flattening out the tops of the feet. And then the heels are slightly separated. So if you look at it from behind, my heels are separated here. And so what that's doing is that's allowing for that internal spiral and rotation, which is going to keep my pelvis in a neutral alignment, keep the legs engaged that we want, having everything lift up. And that allows us to get buoyancy from the ground. So when we're teaching yoga, anything that touches the floor is the most important part of the posture. And when we're teaching cueing, we're going to be asking students to move from the ground up, okay? So what that means is if my feet are on the floor, I'm going to have them gather that energy from the ground. So I might come into Tadasana, either here or hip distance. When we talk hip distance, we're talking about those hip bones. So see if you can point to your own hip bones on your body. Women especially, we tend to think that it's out here. It's actually those hip bones. And so if I draw a line straight down, my feet are landing in the middle of that, right? And that's the plan. So we'll just start in that anatomical position. When we're looking at everything from the side profile, we're looking for that ankle bone and the side of the knee, everything to line up. It's pretty easy to get the leg to line up, right? And then we've got that side of the hip, that middle point, and then we're looking for that shoulder and ear to line up. And oftentimes, because we live in this culture where we're kind of on our phones all the time, we're driving a car on a computer, we're rounded forward. So this is probably the thing that you're gonna see out of alignment most is the head and neck. So remember that we've got a little curve in the spine here, curve of the spine here. So we're trying to accentuate that curve by lifting and lengthening through the crown of the head up, and then the ear is in line with the shoulder. And I'm gonna go ahead and get on my knees because I know that you probably can't see my arm reaching all the way up, but this is also just another variation of any posture. Arms straight up and overhead, middle finger is what we're trying to get to line up with the ear and the shoulder. So oftentimes in a chair posture, you might get tired and your arms come here. And when you're in that chair position, and what we want is this position for that chair. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We'll go through that in just a second. So the most fundamental posture in our yoga practice for foundational postures is mountain pose. We can essentially get anywhere we want in mountain pose. Mountain pose is Tadasana. It's the beginning and the end of all our Surya Namaskars, A and B. And it tends to be where we kind of reset the practice, whether we're teaching Hatha or Vinyasa flow. So from the foundational perspective, if I'm looking at everything being in hip distance, you can kind of think of Tadasana as being kind of that Maha pose, that big pose that encompasses all the other postures. So if we can get this to line up, we can find those same rules of alignment to get into any posture. So from here, when we take that pose, we're just reaching directly up and overhead. Now when we bring the arms up and overhead, we have a tendency to kind of bring the rib cage forward. And so we want to kind of pull the belly in, but we don't want to do it at the expense of tucking the tailbone or letting the knees bend here. So we want to stay nice and sturdy. The feet stay engaged. If you can see, my toes are lifted up off the floor, and we try to set each one down one at a time. And you can think about kind of like when your fingers do this. So we're trying to start to build that dexterity in the foot. So if the foot's engaged, if the toes are off the mat, we're gonna feel the shins light up here. And then we're energetically pushing into the feet. So if you can see my hands, if my hands are my feet here for a minute, and if I'm energetically pushing into the mat, and this is my heel, I'm energetically moving the heels outward, okay? And what that's gonna do, and we'll learn more a little bit in the anatomy section in a couple weeks, but what that's doing is that's rotating everything inward, and I'm getting what we call the inner spiral of the thighs reaching in, thigh bones reaching in. So we tend to stand as people a little bit more like this, more with the external rotation. And there are postures that we're gonna do that have external rotation. You've probably been to classes where we do that. Like Warrior 2, for instance, we've got an external rotation when we come down into that posture. We'll get to it in a moment. But when we're in that Tadasana position, everything is internally rotated. Shoulders are down along the back. What happens often is in Tadasana, when the arms come up and overhead, so do the shoulders. And so we want everything to be light and soft here. Okay, so go ahead and try that. Coming into Tadasana, inhale the arms up high. We always inhale and lengthen the body, and we exhale and we close the body, or we release out of the posture. So that's your mountain pose. It's on page 19 in your toolbox, okay? Another foundational pose, we've got Warrior 1 and Warrior 2. Those postures are in Warrior 1 family and Warrior 2 family. So all that means, just a refresher for those of you that have already done that first Asana module, Warrior 1 family is anything forward facing with closed hips. So right now, my hips are quote unquote closed, right? Everything's tracking forward. Now, if I get external rotation, which we do in Warrior 2, right? Then I've got open hips. So it's a matter of what direction the feet are facing, and the feet are telling you what the hips are doing, okay? So if we want to get that Virabhadrasana 1, Warrior 1, we can come into it from Tadasana. It's a foundational posture, so we can also step into it from down dog, but the easiest way is to get into it from Tadasana. So let's just go ahead and take our right leg forward, left leg back, okay? And what happens in this posture sometimes is, if you can see my legs, I've got my feet lined up on a tightrope. Really important in this posture that as people are learning it, that we open up so that we're more on what we call railroad tracks. And that way, my hip bones are still in alignment with the knees and the ankles. So hopefully that makes sense for you. When we're here, we can lose balance, right? And most of the time, people's hip bone is gonna come back. And then that starts to open it up, and then we lose the integrity of the posture. So shoulders are always gonna mirror what the hips are doing. Hips are generally gonna mirror what the shoulders are doing. So anytime you take a forward fold and something is kind of moving further forward on one side, like one shoulder, typically that means that the hips are not level and square to the front of your mat. So Warrior 1 position, we're off our tightrope and we've got a wider stance. You can go as wide, a little wider than hip distance if you want. We're still taking up as much mat as possible here. So you might hear a teacher cue that you want to have that thigh parallel to the floor. That's only going to be dictated by flexibility. I'll go ahead and do this side as well. But so what that means is oftentimes somebody's not going to have the flexibility. I have the ability to bring my foot pretty far back with my heel down and my toes still fairly facing forward. Some people are going to have to angle that foot a little bit more, and that means it's just a little bit more work to push that hip towards the top of the mat. Okay, so go ahead and see if you can find that alignment where everything's facing forward. Sometimes you can take your fists to those hip bones, make sure that those fists are facing forward, because the second you start to turn and open the hip and everything's facing the other way, you can do this with like 2 little lasers or flashlights if you want to try that, kind of see what it's looking like. We want the knee to not bypass the ankle. That causes some pretty big damage in the knee. So we're always going to be aware of that. And the same thing when we get into that runner's lunge, right? And we'll be going into a crescent lunge a little bit later. So we want to be able to see the big toe on that front foot. So when we get into the posture, as we lift up, every single posture that we do in our practice, we're inviting in a back bend sensation. So everything's lifted. Now it's really hard to get that back bend sensation the correct way. We tend to think, if I want a back bend, I'm gonna lean back. That's actually counterintuitive, and that's gonna crunch your low back. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna think about lifting. Remember, we inhale, we lift up. That's why we lift those arms up and overhead. And then as you exhale, the thumbs press back, right? The thumbs are leading the way, all that prana's in the hands. Thumbs reach back, but the heart comes forward. So if you're reaching the heart forward, that's gonna enable the full spine to do that work here, okay? So heel is planted back behind you. Weight is evenly distributed over both legs. I'm gonna turn in like every angle possible, okay, so you can see it. Because this pose is taught incorrectly a lot, and if you can get your students to have really good form in those foundational postures, everything else gets easier, right? So back leg is firm. Oftentimes we see people come in here, and then that weight is more balanced on that front leg. We want everything balanced to the pubic bone straight down, so we've anchored the hips directly down to the floor. So if you've got students with tight shoulders and you see this happening, or they can't straighten their arms all the way, what we're gonna do is we can invite our students to cactus. You can invite your students to have the arms overhead and focus a little bit more. I know you can't see my thumbs, so it'll come down. And focus a little bit more on that lift through the chest and the thumbs reaching back from here. Okay, the other option is just to take the hands out of it and keep the hands on the hips. And that's gonna invite your students to really focus on the lower half of the body. And in your book, you've got different variations of it. Just make sure that that heel's down behind you. Make sure that that buoyancy is gathered from the earth up and that there's power in the legs. The other thing you're gonna notice in this pose is when we start to get tired, that knee starts to open up, right? And so the weight starts to fall into the pinky toe side of that foot. So we're always gonna focus on bringing the weight into the big toe mound. That's that space right behind the big toe. And that's gonna invite everything to continue to draw inward into the posture. So that gives you something to work on in Warrior 1, right? So Virabhadrasana 2 or Warrior 2, that's our second set of families, okay? So that's anything really side facing on your mat, that's a standing posture. So we can step into it from Tadasana, we'll just step back and then start to turn our body. So from here, same principles of alignment, making sure everything's in that line from here up. So if I'm looking at you from the side, I'm not leaning forward, right? And notice my foot over here, it's kind of angled. In Warrior 2, we want that foot completely facing the short end of your mat, okay? Now this back foot can do a couple of things. It can be angled slightly in, however, we have to pay attention to that hip because guess what? That hip bone starts to reach forward. So I tend to have my foot facing directly out, and we're back on a tightrope rather than those railroad tracks. So this heel right here at the front of the mat is lined up with the arch of my foot at the back of the mat. And that's how you know that you've got that proper alignment. So you can try it on both sides and just focus on the legs first. And I like to think of this as like crossing the road. It's kind of silly. When my kiddo was little, you know, you think about when you teach your children to cross the road, you look one direction, you look the other direction where the traffic's coming from, and you look one more time before you cross. And so that's kind of what we're doing in this posture here. So what people forget about is this thigh back here. We're so focused on getting nice and deep and low, and then we kind of start to move forward. My shoulders are now out of alignment. They're not over my hips. I want to keep the torso in line with those hips and pelvis to keep the spine nice and long and elevated. So I'm gathering, again, that buoyancy. That's that word we're using, that lift, that energy from the ground up. And then we can add the arms in here. Generally, when we add the arms, this arm gets lost, okay? Because we're looking this direction, and then we start to see that, or we start to see that, or this arm just kind of does its own thing. So again, you can always take the arms out of it. And a nice little exercise that you can do, you can come out of the posture if you want. A nice little exercise you can do is actually turn the palms up. It's gonna help rotate the shoulders open. And then you're gonna squeeze the elbows back as if you were trying to meet back behind your spine. And that's gonna give you that lift through the chest that we're looking for. And then turn the palms down and stretch out from there. And it keeps that engagement right back here. Okay, so that's kind of what we're looking for. It's a very active posture. So with everything lined up, I'm still seeing the big toe. I'm gonna look both directions, right? I'm gonna look that one direction for twice. So instead of just focusing on this knee, first I'm gonna start with the back leg, okay? That's the one that's forgotten a lot. So this hip generally needs to go back. The best way to get that hip back is to push my thigh back, okay? I'll do it from the side so you can see as well. So if I'm in the posture, you can kind of see a little bit more of my booty here. If I need this hip to go back, I push the thigh back. Now, oftentimes, when that thigh gets moved, my knee comes forward, and I'll show you from this angle. So my thigh goes back, my knee tends to come forward. You see that? So see, you can see my thigh back here. I'm sinking into the posture, I'm getting into alignment, everything's facing this way. Oh, I need to push my thigh back. And that's because of someone's hip socket, whether or not it's a deeper hip socket and just the amount of flexibility they have in the myofascia. So what you're going to do is you're going to focus on getting that hip back by pushing the thigh back. That's also gonna level the sacrum back behind you, give you a nice little J-Lo booty. It's gonna press your butt back just a little bit, okay? Then from here, we're gonna look for the big toe. So if you felt that knee come forward, you're gonna then readjust so that that knee is tracking directly over the ankle so that you've got that strong joint stack is what we call it, because those joints are gonna be strongest when they're supporting one another, right? And then from here, we come back, once we reposition that knee, make sure that thigh is still in its place. You're gonna feel the belly hollow a little bit when you do this, and the low back gets really broad. That's what we're looking for. Arms out wide, and we've got that warrior two. So you can go ahead and try that on both sides as well. Pay attention to the back leg, front leg, and we build it from the ground up. So just like in Tadasana, focus on the feet first, let everything build up from there, okay? All right, so downward facing dog. I've got a little bit of a shoulder injury, so I'm just gonna be mainly focused on the view, this side profile on my right side today. But downward facing dog, it's one of our foundational poses. It's the foundation of all of our prone positions that are on the floor. It's also gonna help you get in and out in a vinyasa class into that lunge, right? Back and forth. So from downward facing dog, there's a couple things that we wanna do every time we go into our practice. We wanna have a few things that are the same every time. So when we create these measurements that are personalized to us. So the ways that there's two really good things that you can focus on when you get into your down dog. A lot of times people will be in all fours, and in class this happens all the time. We say, all right, push back into down dog. So if I push back into down dog from here, you're gonna see me tent this hand. It's just because I have a shoulder injury. As I push back and I lengthen my body back, okay, I'm a little tight in my down dog. Do you see that? We'll talk about my knees in a second. So I really need to step my feet just a little bit further back behind me. Oftentimes people get really fixated on their heels touching the floor and their legs getting longer. But if we really think about everything coming from the ground up, my hands are gonna be really important. So I want you to go ahead and place your hands on the mat. And we're just gonna do a little exercise where you spin your hands so that your middle fingers face one another. I'll go ahead and face you. So from this position, I'm gonna rotate in. So my shoulders and my hands are in perfect alignment now, and I know this because my body isn't gonna lie, and I'm gonna be able to line up my posture every single time I get into it. So middle fingers, unless you've got crazy long fingernails, middle fingers are going to touch, and that's gonna be, you're gonna spin your hands back, and you know now I've got my shoulder, elbow, middle finger all in a line here. Okay, and that's what we're looking for. So that's your little trick, your little party trick on getting into down dog properly with the arms. Oftentimes we have our arms just a little wider than we think than we actually need to be. You can also do it and practice it with a block between the hands just to keep you from moving the hands too close if that's ever a problem. Usually though, we tend to be too far apart. And then that puts a lot of pressure on the shoulder joint. Now when your hands are down to the mat, I want you to really focus on gripping the earth. So go ahead and pick your hands up and imagine your puppy kind of stretching and they kind of grip the carpet with their claws. So that's essentially what you're doing. We're pushing into the finger pads here. And then once we get those finger pads attached, I want you to think about kind of like Spider-Man fingers, and then the rest of the fingers can start to come down and grip and push down, and then we push through the pads of the hands. Most new practitioners have wrist issues because they're not doing the pose properly. You might see people put their hands down like this, and your students their fingers might be kind of loose, or you might notice it in your own practice where you're noticing that, man, I love yoga, but I am having a really hard time with my wrists right now. It is gonna be normal to have a little bit of discomfort as you're starting something new, so try not to discourage your students from that, but the more as a teacher you can get your students to come into that good foundational practice with the hands all the way to the earth, it's gonna be more sustainable for your students and you, and it's just gonna be more comfortable to be in the posture. It'll also help them later up level into like a handstand, for instance, because they're gonna have the whole hand to work off of and not just the wrists, okay? So that downward facing dog, we measure it out, we're in that right position, and then I'm gonna actually step back into a plank, and now this plank posture is what's gonna teach me that I'm in the right position. So now my hips come up and back, and I can press my heart back towards my heels. Okay, so, or towards my toes, I guess. So from here, my hamstrings are a little tight. I've been on the bike a little bit today, and I've also done a couple of classes. So what happens is the spine tends to round here because people really get fixated on lengthening these legs, maybe even pulling their heels to the floor. Now, this is probably not gonna do a lot of damage or anything to the body, but it's not going to feel as good as if we lengthen the spine. Spine is going to be the most important. So we grip the earth with the hands, grip the earth with the feet, find that buoyancy, and we're going to press the heart back towards the thighs, right? Bend the knees a little bit to get that lift, and then eventually the legs can begin to straighten. But you notice the line that we're creating, again, joint stack, is from here all the way along to the hip, okay? So you can look at that one more time, and you can feel it in your own body. What happens if you bend your knees, feet are hip distance or closer? What happens if I bend my knees, press my heart towards my belly? Okay, when you're warming up in this posture, it's also totally okay to step the feet as wide as you want. And oftentimes I'll cue that in a class if I've got an idea of where I want to go that might need wider feet to teach something that I'm trying to teach in class. So if I actually take my feet so that my pinky toes are to the outer edges of my mat, and I bend my knees and I lift my heart back, I'm gonna get so much more space in between my sit bones, and that's gonna actually lift and lengthen the spine a little bit more. And then eventually I can start to work my feet closer together and still maintain that alignment. So down dog, we probably hit that one over the head, but we all tend to do it wrong. I probably did it wrong for the first decade of my yoga practice until someone really laid it down for me. So see how you can change it. I would love for you to get a photo in this posture and just kind of see where, or go back and look at your Surya Namaskar and what your down dog looked like, and now focus a little bit more on how you can lengthen the spine and get that curve out of the back. All right, so next foundational pose is Dandasana or staff pose. So you're more than welcome to use your bolster, a block, a blanket, and then your strap, because there's lots of variations. I tend to like using a blanket in this pose. So when we use a blanket as a prop, we're gonna invite our students to kind of bring those sit bones all the way to the edge. So that way I get this nice little pelvic rotation so that I can comfortably sit in this position. We're looking for a right angle. Again, ear, shoulder, hips. If I bring my arm up, it includes this middle finger here, okay? So we wanna widen that space in between the sit bones, and you might hear your teacher ask you to kind of move that cush from your tush straight and kind of press those sit bones down a little bit more. The sit bones, you're actually gonna really be able to feel them. You can go ahead and reach underneath and kind of give yourself a little feel up right there if you want to. But the legs are long. If you have tight hamstrings, and this is okay, continue to lift the hips. There's no harm in that. That's actually gonna get you into more alignment, and you're gonna be a better yoga practitioner because of it. So don't be afraid to lift yourself up as high as is comfortable for you in order to straighten those legs, okay? It's also okay if the knees are slightly bent here. So if you know that you are working with somebody that is elderly and struggling with mobility a little bit, maybe they don't have a lot of range of motion in the hips, you can always wedge 2 blocks right under the knees, and that's gonna still help enable length in the hamstrings. So we oftentimes think that when we forward fold, we're just reaching down, okay? So notice what happened to my spine here. It starts to round, you can see my shoulders rounding. I'm out of alignment. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna activate those legs, the quadriceps engage, the toes come back to the body so they're spread wide just like they were in Tadasana. And we inhale and create the length. So you're starting to see a pattern. We inhale, create length, exhale, we release into the posture. So a little exercise that's fun to do with a dynamic movement is as we exhale, see if you can cactus your arms, pull your heart forward. Now notice your range of motion is a lot less than if your arms are up and overhead, right? And that's because we're keeping that middle and upper back stabilized in alignment. So we'll do 2 or 3. Inhale up, exhale, press forward, cactus the arms, keep the hands pressed back. Inhale, reach up. Notice how the arms in that cactus position stay in alignment with the spine. See that? My middle finger is lined up with the elbow, which is lined up with the hip all the way down. Inhale up. Good, now this time, as you exhale, cactus the arms, bring the heart forward, release the hands down. Now if you can reach hold of those feet, fantastic, that's great. If not, go ahead and grab your strap and throw it over the balls of the feet rather than the arches, okay? Now this can be used as leverage here, and if I had a longer strap, I would actually roll it a little bit more around my hands so that my hands don't have to grip so much, and it enables me to relax my shoulders a little bit more. So from this posture, we inhale, come up, and then from here we can exhale into that seated forward fold, and we'll talk a little bit more about that forward fold later. But Dandasana is our foundational pose for anything that's reclined or supine, which is laying on our back. So it's a very gentle posture. It's good for everyone. It's a good one to even practice meditation in. Sit bones down, hands reach down to the earth. I have a crazy long torso, so you can see that my hands don't even come all the way to the floor. Lift through the chest, shoulders come back, looking for that same line all the way down. Legs are active. If they're inactive, the feet might fall open, and then we're not really engaged in the posture. There are some styles of yoga, yin in particular, where it's okay to kind of round and flop the body open, but we're focused on an alignment-based practice right now. So those are a few of those poses. We're gonna get into a lunge in just a second. And lunge pose is really how most vinyasa classes are gonna move through your sequence. So it's really good that you can find some really good cues to get into the proper alignment. So I'm gonna go ahead and walk you through this. Go ahead and grab your 2 blocks if you've got them. Blocks are fantastic to help create like go-go gadget arms to make you have a little bit more room. And with my shoulder injury, I just love having them. So we're gonna move from downward facing dog into a lunge, and then we'll also do it from the front of the mat so you can see the variation. So we're starting with the harder one first. So from downward facing dog, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna slowly extend that leg just because it helps me engage just a little bit more. I'm gonna coil into the belly, round the spine, and slowly step between the hands. To get that foot exactly where I need it to be and use abdominal strength, what you'll notice is as this right leg comes forward, I create space by tenting the fingers on that right hand. Now I want you to also watch what's happening on my left heel, what's happening when I bring that right foot forward. So from this lunge, we're gonna move into a lunge. So I'm in alignment right here. I'm slowly gonna lift my heel, pull my right leg forward. Now notice, I've now got buoyancy in this back leg. Look how much more room it makes. It lifts my hips several inches, and then I can come all the way forward with that foot, and my abdominal strength is what's keeping it there, and those hip flexors are working properly. So see if you can try that. What happens oftentimes with our students with less mobility, or if we're working in our own inflexibility, because our flexibility comes and goes, right? And it has a lot to do with our diet, time of year. We'll learn a little bit about Ayurveda. And so you're gonna find that one practice does not always mean that your next practice is gonna be the same. So we can always drop that knee in this posture, but from this position, we're in our lunge. I'm gonna come up onto my fingertips here, and I'm gonna lengthen my body. So as I pull the crown of the head forward, I'm looking for that same alignment all the way back to the heel. Sometimes our students might be here, and if that's the case, ask them to come up onto those blocks, okay? And that's gonna get them into alignment. So from a front angle, that heel tends to turn in back behind me a little bit. So see if you can pull that heel straight back. Whenever we use blocks, or remember, we've got the rules of alignment. We want the shoulder and the wrist in a line. It also means that we don't want the blocks out here. We're reaching forward. We want them directly underneath the shoulder, okay? Now, sometimes what happens is we get into the pose, the knee starts to open up, okay? And that happens pretty regularly when the body's tired. So the inner thigh is spiraling down. So think about Tadasana legs again. We're going for that inner spiral. And so as we bring alignment and length into that back leg, we want to pull this hip crease back. What that does is it's going to level this space on my back. It's going to level my sacrum, keep everything in alignment, keep my spine exactly where it needs to be. So when I'm going to go ahead and come over, I'm going to switch legs. I'm going to move on to the left leg. I lied. I'm going to do it this way. So notice how you can kind of see both booty cheeks right here. Now if I pull this hip crease back, my knee opens up, I can sink down, get that right angle here that I'm looking for, knee over ankle. If you notice your students or you are putting weight into the ball of the foot, that means that you need to either set that back knee down and reposition this front foot, or come up out of the pose a little bit more, because when this knee bypasses the ankle, it's not supporting. Now we can bypass the ankle in one place, in one time. We won't do it in a 200 hour, but if you ever hear a cue, it's not incorrect. If it bypasses, if this back knee's down. And that's because now this leg isn't bearing the brunt of the weight, okay? When this leg starts to take the weight of the body, that knee, we don't want that patella to reach in front of, because then it's like when you walk downstairs or you've gone on a long hike and you're walking downhill, and all of a sudden your knees hurt and it hurts right down here below the kneecaps, that's just because there's not the support and there's just a lot of jarring sensation. Okay, so that was pretty much a runner's lunge from the back of the mat. We've got our down dog, right? Lift, and then slowly step it forward. Good, so we're gonna come to the top of the mat and we'll get into the same posture, okay? So we inhale, create length. Exhale, fold. This should be familiar because we did it in Surya Namaskar. I'm gonna use my blocks. Inhale, lengthen. From here, I'm gonna exhale and step back. This is obviously an easier way to get into runner's lunge than if I were to come from downward facing dog. So think about the population that you're working with, especially if you're working with prenatal. Kids are fine, they tend to kind of flop back and forth. Any kind of geriatric population is gonna struggle from that down dog position forward. So just moving from the top of the mat and letting the top of the mat be your reset button every time rather than down dog is helpful. So lunge, we're gonna move into a crescent lunge variation of it too, I believe. So crescent lunge we use in class a lot. And all it is a lifted lunge with those arms up and overhead. So I want you to think that back bending, it's a back bending posture. Everything's forward facing, so we know it comes from Warrior One family, okay? But it can also be considered one of the foundational postures too. So from this lunge, you could do it on the knee or off. I'm gonna just do it on the knee because I'm a little tired today. Everything's still facing forward, hips are level, and all Anjaneyasana is reaching up to the sky, okay? Now notice that my knee is down, so my knee might have come, my back knee's down, so my front knee might have come forward. So I'll do it completely in alignment here with it lifted. Oops. Good. It becomes a little bit of a balance challenge sometimes. Now it's really easy to compress the low back here if I just pull my heart back. So my goal is to lift my heart up to the sky, press the thumbs back, and that's what gets that back bending engagement that I'm looking for. So hopefully you learned something on that one. So play with those postures. I meant to tell you the page numbers, you've got it in front of you, but this one's on page 46. You might, we call it all sorts of things, but it's under the lunge, I believe, in your book, also known as crescent lunge. So it's all those variations, but every vinyasa class are gonna be moving through that posture. All right. Okay, so a couple other postures that we have and have not covered, okay? I'm gonna go to a foundational pose. It's actually the last one on your foundational structure pose list, and that is corpse pose or shavasana. I don't ever call it corpse pose, I always call it shavasana, and that's probably the most common Sanskrit word that we use in our yoga practice. But also I want you to think of it as a variation of Dandasana. So Dandasana is that seated posture right here, and then when we roll it back and down, it is, I'm gonna scoot forward, it is more of a mountain pose, right? So if I stayed engaged, everything's in alignment. But corpse pose is really meant to be at the end of the practice or resting in between, maybe in a power class. And so we want everything to be relaxed. Palms are always face up because that's gonna rotate the shoulder open so the chest can stay relaxed and free, okay? So the breath can move effortlessly. And then the feet are gonna rotate open because now I'm not engaging the body. So when I was engaging the body, remember everything was kind of energetically squeezing out through the heels. Now my toes are flopping open and that's okay. So we don't really talk about teaching this posture, but read up a little bit about the history of this pose. And there's some really cool benefits to just taking a moment, 5 minutes out of your day, laying in this posture. If you have mamas that are in their second or third trimester and they're just uncomfortable on their back, you can do a variation of this pose with a bolster. And it's not really the same pose, but you can do a variation of this pose right here and just let everything relax, okay? So this is always an option. Anybody that's a little bit heavier or has low back issues, especially maybe after a back bending class where they're, maybe they pulled something or used a muscle they haven't used in a while, placing a bolster behind the knees is always gonna make things feel better. So you can also do Shavasana with those legs down here, body nice and relaxed and falling back, feet are still resting open. They can also bring the feet in Baddha Konasana with the knees wide. Whatever you do, palms are always down, face up. You can also teach a class of Shavasana here if that feels comfortable. But most people are most comfortable right here, either with or without the bolster. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move up to, we're gonna now move up our list. We'll be ending with extended side angle in a moment. But what we've got next is cat-cow, okay? So this posture, we tend to put in a lot of warm-up sequences. It might be kind of a way for us to see the counter pose. And oftentimes it's taught incorrectly because you hear people say, lower your belly to the floor. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a nice broad engagement of the spine in both directions, okay? Extension and flexion. So knees are under the hips, wrists are under the shoulders, okay? Sometimes people are a little too tight, sometimes they're a little too far, but see if you can get that just right spot, okay? I like to keep toes engaged because it works on foot dexterity. It's gonna teach a lot for your students who are focusing on balance. It's also just a really good thing to do because most people don't spend their days, or they spend their days wearing shoes, right? So their feet aren't free to move. So the more we can sit like this and get that discomfort where it's gonna stretch the arch and curl the toes, it's gonna be better for that person in the long run. We're really gonna be working on foot health, which is absolutely important. So I like to keep the toes curled under. It's also gonna help with stability if you're ever doing any kind of movements in your posture. But for these cat-cows, we're gonna go ahead and do it the traditional way, and I'll show you a non-traditional way, more from a prana vinyasa perspective. So as you inhale, lift through the heart, press the tailbone back. So rather than dropping the belly, think about pressing your tailbone up and back and pulling your heart and crown of the head forward. So it's just like every time we created that faux back bend in any of those lifted postures, we're lifting this part up. Okay, what that's going to do is it's going to help continue to engage the right abdominal and low back muscles. Okay, remember our core is pretty much from here all the way through like mid to low thigh, right? So most of the time we think abdominals, but low back, if we've got really strong abdominals and not a strong low back, we're going to cause a lot of problems. So all of our classes, we want to be really well-rounded. So we're gonna inhale, lift and lengthen, press the heart forward, press the tailbone back, spreading the sit bones wide. So it's that down dog position across the sit bones. And then as you exhale, you're gonna round the spine, pull the belly button up and in. Rather than curving the tailbone forward, what happens if you pull the belly in and actually push deeper into the hands and round through the shoulders? Your eyes can then come into the belly. And go ahead and take your next inhale, lengthen. Exhale, push it out, around. So sometimes changing the breath or reversing prana is gonna serve your flow. This is more of like a 300-hour level thing, but if you hear it or see it in the class, I want you to know that it's still correct. I joke around a lot about how yoga is a lot like the English language. It's the rule, it's the rule, it's the rule, it's not until it's not, right? So I before E, except after C, and whenever I feel like doing it, right? So it's also kind of a bit of a math formula as we build a class. We'll talk about that a little later. But when we do something in practice, there has to be a why behind it. So as a teacher and student of yoga, every class you go to, I want you to really inquire, why is the teacher having us do it this way? And so this is one of those reversals of breath that I often want my students to inquire about. So the other variation is where we think about gathering prana. So rather than inhaling and lengthening, what if you inhale and coil, where you gather everything? So think about, you're taking a breath and creating a big balloon in the body. So inhale, and then exhale, press the breath away. Inhale, gather it up. Exhale, push it away. So we've now reversed the breath. Before it was inhale, open, exhale, close, which is traditional in our practice as we're learning. When we open something, we inhale. When we close something, we exhale. But what if we think about the back body opening and closing? So if that's the case, we're opening the back body as we inhale, and we're exhaling and releasing the back body. So you can look at it that way if that helps you at all. But we'll talk about pranavayus in just a couple of weeks. And in pranavayus, it's the movement of prana and how prana, which is energy, moves through our body, and that comes through the breath. Our breath is prana. It's that life force that feeds and oxygenates our body. And so when we have that prana and we fill our body up, we can think about holding the prana and then pushing the prana away. Inhale, exhale. Okay? So that's your cat-cow pose. Maybe the first time you've had anybody go that in depth about it, right? The next pose is chair pose, Utkatasana. This is one of our favorites. I mean that facetiously. Okay, so just like our Tadasana, feet are either together or hip distance, okay? Now, if we know that we're gonna do something from chair pose, say I'm gonna take a twist, right? I want my big toes together to touch. You're gonna wanna cue that, okay? You're also gonna wanna cue where the arms are. I have this weird shoulder thing, so I might do this one in cactus for a little bit today. So as I sit down into my chair, I want you to pay attention to those lines, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and bring my arms up for this one just for a second. So remember, if you get tired, we want it to be here. So look for the lines across the body, middle finger, elbow, shoulder, ear, all the way down to that tailbone, to those hip bones really, okay? And then we've also got a nice line, if we were to draw a straight line all the way down, that way. So I teach this posture a couple ways. As long as you're not breaking any alignment rules, you're totally fine. Feet are together apart, you know, apart this far, not this far, okay? This far starts to put a lot of pressure on the outer portion of the knees, okay? So when we're in this position, we can also focus on just the lower half of the body where we want to maybe teach something like an upright bow pose. And so this might be one of the simpler variations of it where the shoulders stay over the hips. There's a lot more buoyancy here. I have to work a lot more to maintain rather than this position right here. Both are correct. I just want you to know that. So pay attention a little bit to when you attend a class online, if you can see somebody changing that posture. Usually the arms are the first thing to come out of alignment. And also we want to make sure that we're flat on the feet. We don't come up off of the heels, okay? So that is a quick tutorial on chair. I want you to go ahead and read about that one in your book. It is, of course, on page 33. So incline, plane, and reverse table. These ones are great warm-up, cool-down postures, and they're just fun to throw in if you've got something that'll help open the body. So we're gonna start in our Dandasana, which is our foundation for this pose. Okay, that's a little hint because I think you had to ask what the foundation was for all these poses. Okay, so incline, plane, and reverse table. I'm gonna do both variations. The plane is just a plank. It's just a plank, only my hands are behind me instead of in front of me. And so as I inhale, push into the hands, lift the hips, and I'm not gonna go quite as high as I normally would just because of that shoulder issue, but I'm trying to line up again, ankle all the way up. So you're starting to see that pattern, right, of everything in alignment. I'm not gonna drop my head back, I'm gonna create length. Okay, the other variation is right here, knees bent, lifting hips to line up with those knees and shoulders, okay? So see if you can find that one in your book too, because I'm not gonna go too deeply into that just because of my own shoulder issue. It's a great one if you did a shoulder class and you're trying to open things up. So if you were here a lot, if you're trying to open the shoulders more for teaching a wheel posture, that's gonna be a great pose for you. All right, 2 more postures in our foundation. We're gonna go into triangle pose. It's a very, this posture is used quite a bit in class, and it's a wonderful pose. There's been a lot of controversy lately as in the last several years, about what that front foot needs to be doing and kind of how deeply we go into the posture. So traditionally, from the Mysore tradition of Ashtanga yoga and also Iyengar method of Hatha yoga, we tend to want that hand to come all the way down to the floor in our triangle or Trikonasana pose. What we're going to do is focus on the alignment of our students and being in their own bodies, right? Because everybody's body is different. So we're going to start in Tadasana and step back into a warrior 2. Okay, so from this position, just step it back. A block can come in handy for you. So we're going to make sure everything's facing the long end of your mat. Okay, and then you can have that block nearby. But notice that my hips aren't swaying from side to side. They're strong and sturdy. So you can see that this foot is facing the short end of my mat. This foot's facing the camera here on the long end of the mat. And I can open up my stance as long as it's comfortable, okay? So like warrior 2, straighten the leg and I'm in the pose properly, okay? So I've measured it just right. The other thing that I wanna do is when the arms come out, we lift up through the chest, create the length, inhale, right? Exhale, sink the arms. So we're gonna extend and reach towards the top of the mat first. So I'm getting into that extended side angle, and then I'm gonna slowly release that hand down to the floor. Now, traditionally we've been taught that this hip comes forward, this rib cage comes back, and that's still gonna be correct as far as alignment goes. We wanna still keep shoulders over shoulders, hips as much in alignment as possible, But a lot of people have egos, myself included, and we want to just get deep in the pose. So we need to really pay special attention to everyone continuing to facing the side end of the mat. And also you might find that this foot might turn in a little bit, and that's going to be okay. Like I said, there's controversy over that. I'm going to say it's okay. We'll move into a balanced posture a little later, and we'll talk about it again. So we'll come back to that. But triangle pose, all sorts of variations, okay? I am trying to create new boundaries within the body. So I'm extending an arm, I'm lowering arm. So you can see that alignment right here. We've got alignment along that leg. And then I take like a kind of an angled turn. So I'm drawing up, across, got my space here. I've got a triangle made with my legs, and I'm in the posture. You can always have your students take that hand to the hip. If you notice that shoulder falling forward or their hand, sometimes people are kind of like here. That's getting that wrong rotation, that forward rotation, with the opening rotation in that shoulder. So let's try it on both sides. We're just gonna pivot, everything's facing forward. Okay, so now we're gonna really focus on that length. We're creating space for the rib cage. As you extend forward, inhale, reach, exhale, find your posture. Now, if you're ever in a class with me, you might see that my triangle pose feels really good right here. I've got some low back issues from a spinal injury, and so I don't really go that deeply into the posture. And so I'll try to get into an alignment here rather than going for that angle. Does that make sense? So read up a little bit about that, about where we want to position the feet. The weight is in all four corners of the feet here. We tend to kind of fall in or out a little bit, so pay special attention to that. When the arms stack, make sure that that hand isn't flipped because that's drawing the shoulder down, okay? And I'll do it from the side angle here, okay? So you might have your students, you might see your students here trying to touch the floor, and that arm kind of hangs out here. What we're trying to do is stay in as much of alignment as possible, okay? So that's our triangle pose. Extended side angle. So extended side angle comes from a warrior two family again. It becomes a great structural posture to get you to other stuff. I'm gonna use that block again because the arms can do a lot of different things. We're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna start on my left side, move to the right this time. So I'm in my warrior two. Now I'm gonna draw that same line. So I'm gonna extend just like in triangle pose, only my knees bent. And I'm gonna turn my palm up so my forearm can rest on that thigh. I've got the knee over the ankle, and then I'm gonna bring that arm up and overhead. This is a traditional posture that we see in power yoga classes, but we've got more prana to use, so let's extend that arm up and overhead. And now look, I've got a beautiful line from the fingers up here all the way down to that foot, and I can create it. Now sometimes we'll see this, and that's just because we're getting tired. So don't be afraid to use that block, come out of the posture a little bit, and then jump into it again, okay? So I'm gonna switch sides. So variations on this pose. This is gonna be the most common, palm face up. Think about, I want somebody to slap some money in my hand. I'm gonna have my fist open, my hand open, in that receiving position, that gesture. I'm gonna lift the heart, same principles of alignment, try and keep everything stacked. Now, I'm gonna take that arm overhead. One little cheat here, you can bring the arm forward, pull the shoulder blade back, and then swivel it overhead, and that's gonna get you into that pose that you're looking for, right? Other variations for the hands are gonna be to come down to that block, okay? Now my arm and my leg are in alignment, they're matching. And then the other variation, as flexibility permits, notice if my hand comes down to the floor, I had to lift and lower through that thigh. But when I did that, my knee did not overextend. So the hands coming to the floor has 100% to do with the buoyancy gathered from the feet and the flexibility in those hips, okay? So those are our foundational and structural poses. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. You can hit me up on Facebook as well, on Sarah TV Russell. And I look forward to sharing a little bit more with you soon. Have a wonderful practice. Get into those foundational poses. Namaste.